Most fighters lose at one point or another, but in these 10 cases, you can't help but get the feeling that their eventual outcomes could have been avoided. These are the 10 weirdest disqualifications in UFC history. Dean Barry versus Mike Jackson. You only get one chance to make a first impression, and for the Irish kickboxer Dean Barry, well, let's just say he's going to have a very tough time getting a second impression. Taking on Mike Jackson, you know, the guy who beat up CM Punk for 3 rounds, it's not like Barry was being thrown to the wolves or anything for his first walk. From the get-go, it was clear that Barry's polished striking was going to be an issue for Jackson, or at least that's how it seemed early on. Barry tried to land a spinning back kick to the body, only to land below the belt on his opponent. And then, shortly after that, he accidentally poked Jackson in the eye. With only a few minutes gone, the referee decided enough was enough and ruled the contest a DQ victory for Mike Jackson. Was it a case of octagon nerves or something more nefarious? Well, either way, Barry was cut from the UFC shortly after and has since revealed that he went through a period of depression after this disastrous debut. Michel Pedraza versus Diego Sanchez. Diego Sanchez was in the middle of a very tough battle with Michel Pedraza, one that was not going his way at all. But when Pedraza managed to drop Sanchez with a deft knee, a follow-up knee caught the Ultimate Fighter winner when he was technically grounded. The referee saw this instantly and moved in to check on Sanchez. In a rather bizarre turn of events, Diego asked the ref if he would get a DQ victory if he said he wasn't able to continue.
Can't see the blood, you can't see. It was an illegal shot. All right, it was an illegal shot. Natural.
A question that the ref wasn't able to officially answer. But either way, Sanchez made what was described as a veteran decision and took the victory. The problem? Well, he wasn't exactly winning the fight, and his response to the question of whether he could continue or not left more than a few fans understandably skeptical. But let's not rag on Diego too much. The dude has already given us so many classics. Greg Hardy versus Ben Sassoli. Okay, we know that this one wasn't technically the lone DQ of Greg Hardy's UFC career, but trust us, we'll get to that later. But to break it down into simple terms, Greg Hardy should have been disqualified on the spot for using his inhaler mid-fight, and the fact that the bout's result wasn't changed until after the fact makes this one a whole lot stranger. Look, we know that Hardy was an MMA newcomer, but it wasn't the first time he made a total mess of the sport's rule set, and for him to actually ask his corner for the inhaler between rounds was truly insane. And if the referee had seen him do so, Hardy would have been DQ'd on the spot. In the end, he managed to win the fight, but the result was immediately overturned due to this baffling decision on his part. Greg Hardy versus Alan Crowder. But hey, we're not through with Greg Hardy just yet. Prior to his signing with the UFC, there were already quite a few question marks over this guy's ability to contend with the elites of the heavyweight division. And in the second round of this divisive figures debut, his critics were proven right when the inexperienced Hardy made the rookie mistake of landing a knee on the very clearly grounded Crowder. It wasn't even a reactive move. Hardy had more than enough time to assess the situation, and yet, after thinking about it for a moment, he still went ahead and landed this illegal shot. The ref called the fight there and then, and Greg Hardy's UFC debut was officially ruled as a total failure. Alex Andrade versus Amore Batesh. This next one is all kinds of bizarre. In fact, the current rule set of the UFC simply does not allow for something remotely close to this to happen at all. Alex Andrade was wearing a pair of shoes to the octagon at UFC 26 in Iowa back in the year 2000. According to Iowa law at the time, you were allowed to don a pair of wrestling shoes so long as you didn't kick while wearing them. And yeah, I guess you can all figure out what happened next. Andrade, in there with his opponent, Amore Batesh, seemed to forget about this ruling entirely, and in the first round, after dropping Batesh with a punch, Andrade swiftly followed it up with a kick. Not only was this a kick with shoes on, but it was a clear kick to a downed opponent, a double foul if you will. After getting his warning, he somehow made the mistake of doing it again, this time throwing a leg kick that seemed totally ineffective. Then, Andrade came out in the second round and tried to throw a full-on head kick. To be honest, due to the fact that these kicks seemed like fairly run-of-the-mill attacks, it might be easy to give Andrade the benefit of the doubt and call it muscle memory. But either way, Big John McCarthy had seen enough and stepped in to wave this one off. Alessio Sakara versus Patrick Cote. Sometimes it's on the fighters to do better, but in this case, while that was certainly true, some blame does have to be given to the referee in question. Several strikes from Sakara to the back of Patrick Cote's head landed without any warning given whatsoever. In fact, the first real bit of officiating that Dan Miragliotta actually did was to call the fight off entirely as a DQ loss for Sakara. The problem? Well, this entertaining matchup could have gotten a more fitting ending if the referee had done his job better. Let Sakara know that he's out of line once, and he's not likely to make the same mistake again. So, as bad as this was on Alessio Sakara and his own discipline, in our mind, the blame is shared here. Some bizarre work from the veteran referee. Peter Yan versus Aljamain Sterling. Okay, look, we're not going to jump to any conclusions about how hurt or how not hurt Aljamain Sterling might have been after his first matchup with Peter Yan, because, let's be real, there's only one man who deserves to be blamed here. Peter Yan was winning that fight, and in that fourth round, he was on course to score a comfortable defense of his belt. But then, out of nowhere, in one of the most blatant, unprovoked fouls you will ever see, Yan, for some reason, decided to knee Aljo in the face while he was clearly grounded. The ref caught it instantly, leading to Yan becoming the first fighter in UFC history to lose their title by way of disqualification. Sure, Sterling played his part well, but this was entirely Peter Yan's fault. He didn't need to dip into his bag of weapons for one killer blow just because Sterling was there for the taking. It really is hard to know exactly what was going through his head at the time. One of the all-time great title mishaps. And though there's still an argument to be made that Yan is one of the 3 best 135-pounders on the planet, his record is somehow standing a 1-4 in his last 5. Eric Silva versus Carlo Prater. This next one was over in the flash. It took the former prospect Eric Silva just 29 seconds to tag, drop, and eventually finish Carlo Prater for a stunning first-round finish. Except, it wasn't exactly that simple. Sure, the shot that Silva landed initially on Prater was perfectly legal, but in that final flurry of shots, it was clear that at least a couple of them were to the back of the head. Now, you might wonder why an entirely legal sequence can be disrupted by a small portion of it being illegal, but hey, that's the rule set. And to be fair to the referee, upon watching the replays, you can see how Silva's barrage did feature a few illegal shots. In a totally unprecedented move, Joe Rogan, who didn't buy the DQ for 1 second, walked Silva through the replays to proclaim his innocence before then bringing over the veteran referee Mario Yamasaki to interview him inside the octagon. A wild scene, but to be fair to Mario, it seemed like he made the correct call. Jon Jones versus Matt Hamill. People get very hung up on clean, unblemished records these days, something we have certainly taken from the sport of boxing, but when it comes to the great career of Jon Jones, you can't help but get the feeling that he really should have one. Yeah, we know that Khabib managed to go a perfect 29-0, but in Jones's own 29 career fights, he has come out on top in 15 different title fights and 22 outings in the UFC. Those are some crazy numbers, but in reality, Jon should have 23 UFC victories under his belt. And we're going to count the DC win because, come on. But anyway, an early setback in a fight he was dominating against Matt Hamill left Jones with a big, ugly L on his record. 12-6 elbows being banned remains one of the silliest rules in the MMA book, and Despite totally running through Hamill in his early 205-pound encounter, Jones was immediately disqualified for the angle of his elbows, leading to his one and only career loss to date. Gray Maynard versus Rob Emerson. Look, we know this one is another entry that is not technically a DQ, but if a fighter manages to knock himself out, would you rather call the fight result a no contest or a disqualification due to self-inflicted TKO? Because as far as we're concerned, it's against the rules to knock yourself out in an MMA fight. Anyway, this hilarious fight-ending sequence saw Gray Maynard slam his fellow tough contestant Rob Emerson into the canvas, knocking the two of them out in the process. What made this one so funny, however, was the fact that Joe Rogan actually decided to interview Maynard directly after, and when Gray protested the result, claiming that he wasn't actually KO'd, Joe tried to make an example of him, seeking to prove him wrong on live TV. As awkward a post-fight interview as you will ever see. So that's all 10 of our weirdest disqualifications. Which one was your favorite? Do you have any favorite DQs we didn't mention? Let us know in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel.